Hello there, gamerinos and gamerinas. Welcome to UnicornStorm. This is Rady, and today, let's take a look at Hell is Us. Yet another Souls-like added to the ever-growing list. And this time with an early 20th century war aesthetic, which put it on my radar. I actually learned of this game's existence only shortly before it released, but the setting immediately intrigued me. I'm just a sucker for things like this. Setting, atmosphere, art design. So yeah, a Souls-like set in the trenches of a grim, low-tech, war-ridden European landscape immediately spoke to me. I expected a bit less sci-fi, I thought this was more grounded and brutally realistic, having to strangle enemy soldiers to death and stuff like this, but that's just what I get for going into it blind. And it certainly isn't bad, just different from what I expected. But yeah, you have to fight weird, bright white sculpture thingies that look like they escaped from an art gallery. I wouldn't call them scary, but their completely alien design, lacking faces or any other kind of emotion-conveying features, which is ironic because emotions are a major component when battling those guys, is what makes them so horrifying within the story. They're these stoic, uncaring killing machines. They just slaughter us, not out of hatred or malice. It's just their nature, and we can't reason with them because of that. They're not even going out of their way to kill us, but when they get the chance, they will do so. The story so far implies that they are born out of hatred and violence, or broadly, from overflowing negative emotions. And this place is filled to the brim with very, very negative emotions. The game takes place in the fictional country of Hadia, a small isolated country within Europe, ravaged by civil war and decades of oppression by an authoritarian regime. We assume the role of Remy, a soldier who deserted his unit to sneak back into Hadia, the country he was born and smuggled out of as a child. We learn of this in the opening cutscene that takes place after the events of the game, where Remy is interrogated by a interesting looking man. I really like the design. He's clearly not human, at least not a regular human, but he behaves like one, a very polite yet sinister one, like an X-Files antagonist. So Remy tells his story, which is what we are playing, though I'm sure he's not rambling about running back and forth out in the meadows. But then again, should you die? The agent remarks on how that wouldn't make any sense and commands Remy to concentrate, which is cute. It reminds me of Sands of Time, which did a similar thing.
That's not how it happened.
Every game that's contextualized in that way should have a bit of fun with that. But yeah, these scenes pop up every once in a while and give a bit more insight into this dystopian, or maybe better, more dystopian version of our world. It's only little tidbits every now and then, which is representative of the rest of the game. Now, the game isn't as cryptic as Dark Souls, and it isn't trying to. When the game wants to give you some insight, it does so pretty straightforward. But for most of your playtime, you're just piecing together how this world works and what's going on. Most of the knowledge about the current situation is just rumors or guesses based on mythology or religious teachings. And what you learn about the country's history and the war comes from newspaper clippings you find, and diaries and letters and the like, and from inquiring of the locals about it, and the answers you get are heavily biased, since there is a civil war going on and the country is divided into two extremist groups committing atrocious acts. Yeah, the game doesn't hold back when it comes to depicting the horrors of war. People become animals, monsters even, turning on their friends and neighbors. It fits the genre, and of course the game that coined the genre, with its grim and oppressive and at times defeatist atmosphere. And at times it can get a bit preachy, and laying it on thick with the morals and allusions to real-world pendants.
The media played their part in this mess. I hold them responsible for this war.
The atmosphere in this game is amazing. The emptiness plays into the game's strengths, because the game world isn't barren, it's abandoned. It only adds to the immersion, which might be the biggest selling point, or at least marketing point of this game. And while there is some, even a lot of truth to it, it's a bit hyperbolic. Look at what the description on Storefront says. No map, no compass, no quest markers. Well, it's not as unique and revolutionary as the developers or publishers think. It's nothing new and it isn't especially challenging here. I get what they are trying to say, but the world stage shows were a bit unfortunate. What they mean, I guess, is that the game doesn't hold your hand, doesn't just give you all the answers. It wants you to work for your success, not just going through the motions. And in that regard, it succeeds, and is a very satisfying experience because of that. But the claims themselves aren't entirely true. Your starting loadout contains a compass and there are multiple maps in the game. Sure, they aren't what you'd normally consider a map in a game, and aside from your fast travel map, they aren't interactive and you still have to put in some effort to properly read them. But they are here, and they do provide you with useful information and show you where to go. In specific instances, that is. And the lack of quest markers is also nothing new for Souls games, though since this game is rather open-ended and features a lot of wide-ranged free roaming, the lack of objective markers is somewhat unusual, though not unwelcome. The visual design makes up for that by giving you memorable landmarks to mark where points of interest are, which draws you into the game world way more than just looking at the map screen. Though, for one of your major objectives, you actually have an item basically functioning as an objective marker, which leads you in the direction of your next target. But even that little item isn't convenient in any way. You are a deserter, making your way through an unfamiliar country in the middle of a war, which is also getting invaded by monsters, getting by scraping together all you can find, relying mostly on your own intuition and ingenuity. And the few things that give you a little bit of help and assistance do so in a very immersive way. Yeah, this is immersion, the game. Not that it can't be a bit gamey and artificial at times. You see, NPCs give you detailed directions towards certain places, you often need to rely on cues in the environment, and it is nice that there are wind chimes hanging in the trees that a father put up there so that his kids don't get lost in the forest. But the forest isn't actually that large, and even taking the wrong path ultimately leads you to your destination. And it's a cool idea to look for the marked trees that a military expedition left, those huge markings, but their lamps and equipment is also littered all over the place, so you could just follow that trail. But I guess it's nice to have multiple options to find your way. And later areas do get bigger, and clues are more spread out, so you need to be a bit more observant. And not only during exploration, also during puzzle solving. And man, this game loves its puzzles. We get a whole lot of bring the correct key item to the right place puzzles, and since there are no map or objective markers, you have to remember where everything is, or maybe take notes. I guess that would be my criticism with the minimalistic assistance. Now don't get me wrong, I actually really like writing down notes when playing a game. Scribble down symbols you see in the environment, jot down hints and the like. It's awesome and engaging, and games should encourage players more to do that. That was half of the fun in Blueprints. Notes in here. Notes about the game. It's amazing. But the game should really give you the option of taking notes within the game. Like Deus Ex did all the way back, and Prince of Persia brought back in a similar fashion about a year ago. Now, I understand not wanting to give the player a map full of landmarks, quest markers, player location and all that. But my high-tech vehicle is outfitted with a navigation computer, the drone on my back is linked to the internet, and my retro-futuristic datapad can grab and store all kinds of data. Why not give me a simple map, showing the topography and stuff like cities and major locations, and let me put down my own markers with little descriptions, so I find my way back to these locations. Nothing stops me from creating screenshots, or just going on the internet and looking things up. And the latter is something you generally want to avoid as a game developer. It's not a huge problem, but it would have been nice if the game gave you an in-game option to take notes, since a whole lot of these item puzzles revolve around these rods that come with a bunch of different symbols and colors, and you have to remember which of the many mechanisms require which of those. It's easier to remember an NPC who requires a certain item, though even then you might forget where the recipient resides. You have a handy list of persons and points of interest, and also all the quest items, where you can go over the item descriptions again, but those don't really give you the quest description. For that you really need to listen to what the NPCs are saying, which is awesome. It draws you way more into the game world, but in the cases where the quest giver dies, it might get a bit tedious finding out where you need to bring something. Though this kinda is the experience the game is going for. Explore, observe, discover, remember. This one woman regrets not getting to see her pupils anymore, and this one man who lost his family gets rid of old photographs after you complete his quest. So then you have to make the connection yourself to bring the old class picture to her. There's lots and lots of moments like this, and you have to be up to that kind of approach to puzzles and progression, because it's not just with little side quests here and there that you can ignore if you don't like it and only focus on the combat and dungeon crawling and progressing the main story. The main campaign is riddled with these moments as well. Instead of handing over items to NPCs, although that happens as well, you mostly need to find lock combinations, solve rotating block and lever puzzles, align the correct symbols. And most of the time, there isn't just one instruction to do so, not a single diary where the combination is written down. Often, the notes you find only give you a hint to start working towards a solution. And then you still have to gather other information to connect the pieces and think outside the box. One puzzle has you aligned photographs in the correct order that each depict a number to discover the code to an electronic door lock. But one of the numbers on the photograph is illegible, so you have to look for the real world object, the real game world object, to discover the missing number. None of these puzzles are all too hard, but they still require you to think more creatively. And getting to a solution was really satisfying. Though they can become a bit tedious at times, because many of the puzzles are multi-step challenges. You might need to take a look around a dungeon and discover a whole bunch of pieces of information first, before you can solve it. But after having done so, the game now wants you to use 1 or 2 or 3 specific items that you often don't have on hand. So even after solving a long puzzle, you don't get the reward you've been working towards. And often you have no clue where the required items might even be. They might just be around the corner, they might be in a previous location, or they might wait for you in the next chapter. Those moments are less satisfying. Very often you are just inches away from completing a complicated multi-step challenge, but you're missing one random rod to open a mechanism and have to abandon the whole thing that kept you captivated for the last hour or so, without an idea when you'll be able to go back to it. I found it especially annoying with those time rifts. In the story, they are the source of the weird monsters and the reason they return after a while, even when you defeat them. So, an in-game explanation for why you never run out of enemies to kill, and closing them is a secondary objective. They are especially violent or torturous moments that are frozen in time, or well, on a loop, and since the weird creatures are born from negative emotion, this is a good enough explanation for why they originate from there. Shutting those rifts down actually prevents enemies from repopulating an area, and might bring some peace to the poor swords trapped in that loop. If they are trapped in there. The game so far hasn't been clear about that, but there is an implication. Maybe it's just a memory on repeat, but it is certainly an interesting thought you could spin its own game around. Though to be honest, it's a bit arbitrary what creates a time loop and what doesn't. One person getting executed or a car fleeing from an inspection getting shot at is bad enough to create a time loop, but the lynching of a whole family by their neighbors, or a woman getting raped every night in retaliation is not. To shut down a time loop, you first have to kill special enemies within the area. They don't really behave any different, they are not necessarily harder to defeat, they are just flagged as time loop guardians. When you get near one, some distorted sounds start playing. And killing one gives you an on-screen notification as well as a visual and another sound cue. Also, guardians don't respawn when you die or leave and return to an area. After having killed all the guardians, you can enter the time loop to observe what happened to create it, and then you need to use a special item to close it. These special items are single use, so they disappear afterwards, and different time loops need different items. The game works a lot with different colors, so I guess you can discern from afar what kind of item you need, that is, after having tried it at least once to learn what you need. I guess in principle it's a neat idea, having you scour the lands, solving puzzles, helping people, to find, among other things, those prisms you need to close a time loop. But then you will run into a situation where you clear a complicated dungeon, beat the boss, and then you can't enter the time loop because either the last guardian is hidden behind a door you can't open yet, or you can enter the loop but don't have the correct prism on you, so you have to leave and return later. Fight your way all the way back into the innermost chamber of the dungeon. Thankfully, the dungeons are designed with a lot of helpful shortcuts. It's like in the good old days with Demon Souls. And since there is no real fast travel in the game, you're really gonna appreciate the shortcuts you unlock. Getting around the game world is mostly fine, even on repeat visits. The areas aren't too large, even if they might look like it at first. Enemies are clustered in set locations and don't roam around all that much, so you can easily avoid most of them if you just want to get from A to B. And in the more cramped areas, like dungeons or towns and the like, you have the aforementioned shortcuts. Your sci-fi vehicle is only there to get you from area to area, but inside an area you're always on foot. You can travel to your vehicle from most save points, but this only works one way. Since the areas are easy enough to traverse, it's not so bad. But a few more travel points for your high-tech car would have been nice. Like, at least let me access all the major NPCs and locations you have to return to regularly. Again, not the worst issue, but the game sends you back and forth a lot, so a bit of convenience wouldn't have hurt. Okay, I know what you're thinking. All the great atmosphere is really neat. The unique setting is nice to have. The immersion and the creative puzzles are all fine and dandy. But come on, Rady, you treasure of a human being, I hear you say. Tell us about the meat of the game. And to that I say, first, well, thank you. But what do you mean? This all is the meat of the game. It's all about discovering this intriguing place. What, you mean the combat? I mean, it's there. Yeah, joking aside. Of course there's combat in the game and lots of it, and it is a core component of the gameplay loop. But less than you'd expect from a game of this style. This action-adventure puts a lot of stock into the adventure part, so there will be long stretches where you're not fighting anything. Especially when you've cleared an area of enemies and are now just looking for collectibles and stuff. Dungeons force you to think equally as much as prove your skill with the blade. In the past, before this genre has blown up this much, some critics compared the Souls games to Zelda, which is just a silly notion. But if we want to go in that direction, then this game here would come the closest to it. Like, it's the missing evolutionary link between Zelda and Dark Souls. But yeah, of course you come across a lot of enemies in the field or are locked into rooms with them and have to defeat them all the good stuff. And fighting them follows the broader Souls principle. I say broad because more and more each dev team puts their own spin on it without making it just gimmicky. The times of straight up Souls clones are over, it seems. So what's the deal with this game's combat system? As you'd expect, it still features stamina management and is more methodical than straight up action games. Enemies deal relatively high damage, leaving you not much room for mistakes, though you can block pretty much all attacks, which only consumes stamina, and you can dodge, which also consumes stamina and gives you a brief window of invincibility. So even if an attack hits you during your dodge, you still get out of it unscathed. Some enemy attacks flash before they hit, and if you block those at just the right time, which is a pretty generous window to be honest, you parry the attack and deal a huge amount of damage to the enemy's stance. And reducing their stance to 0 opens them up to an instant finisher that looks pretty cool most of the time, when it works. Pretty much standard. Attacking also consumes stamina, and if you at any point run out of it, you can't avoid damage anymore and your next attack has a huge delay and is super slow. This creates a certain rhythm between attacking and defending, and you mostly try to dictate that rhythm. Bait enemies into certain attacks and capitalize on openings. Depending on your weapon, this might look different, since each weapon comes with its unique fighting style and combo chains. The greatsword is powerful but slow and has only a few follow-up attacks, while the dual axes are fast and chain about 1 million attacks together. Instead of a heavy attack for each weapon, you have a charge up that you can stack up to 3 times to unleash a powerful special attack, which consumes some of your limbic energy, which is mana for all intents and purposes. You also use that mana for other abilities that you can equip to either your weapon or your little drone buddy. There's not much difference between the two types, just that some of them are tied to your active weapon and the others work with any equipped weapon. These equipable abilities are pretty versatile, with some of them buffing or healing you, some stunning or distracting enemies, and some being just more types of attacks. Many of them have a casting time though, so you need to be aware of that and wait for a window of opportunity. But yeah, a competent system, but so far nothing really stands out here. This is where we come to this game's healing system. There is no Estus or comparable item in the game, and while there are plenty of single-use medipacks to be found, the core of the healing system is a spin on Bloodborne's rallying system. Whenever you attack an enemy, the inflicted damage appears as a grey bar next to your health, and energy forms in a circle around your character. After a while, this energy ring becomes, I guess, tangible, for a short moment where you can press a button to turn all that energy into health. This potential health disperses if you miss that window or if you get hit while it builds up, even when you're blocking. So, healing back up to full from even a sliver of health is completely doable if you go carefully about it. But to not trivialize it too much, the stamina management also has its own quirk in this game, which functions as a nice balance to the powerful healing system. Your stamina is tied to your current health, so the more health you lose, the lower your max stamina is. Which means, at really low health, you can only barely attack and maybe only block one hit before you're out of breath. Coming back from this is significantly harder, because you can chain attacks together and build up some good healing before the enemies go back on the offense. I really like this system. It has always been a bit weird how someone can be close to death but is still fit as a fiddle. I mean, it makes complete sense, game design wise, but from an immersion standpoint, it makes much more sense to have your health and stamina affect each other. It's not an entirely original approach, not even for Souls games, because the Dark Souls board game already did something similar with having your health and stamina share the same bar and depleting it from opposite sides, so wasting too much stamina could lead to a quick death. But yeah, I really like the rhythm this creates. Similar to Bloodborne, it forces you to be more aggressive, but instead of just hitting back to heal, you need to stay watchful and wait for the right moment without giving the enemies a chance to interrupt you. And there will be times where you defeated a bunch of enemies but wasted your opportunity to heal a large chunk of your lost health. So there is some skill involved in that. It's not just infinite healing and enemies don't become just health dispensers. Enemy variety is there. The main enemies come in a handful of different types, all with unique attacks and movement patterns. Some are rangers, some melee fighters, some have attacks that affect wider areas and linger for a while, some can inflict negative status effects. And the way a group of enemies is arranged vastly alters the flow of battle. Thing is, pretty early on you have seen most of the different enemy types and then they just get repeated with higher stats. So there is not much to learn after a while and you just deal with the same enemies in the same way. Of course the terrain plays a huge role in that, and as I've mentioned, the composition of enemy groups. Are there rangers mixed in with melee fighters? Can you get surrounded? Stuff like that. But there's only so many different scenarios, and the more difficult fights are often more so caused by a bit of good old spam. By the enemy overwhelming you with their numbers. It's not too bad, and it only became a problem a handful of times, and even then I managed to get past them soon enough. But that's only half of the story when it comes to the enemies. You see, pretty often you come across enemies that are linked to another entity. These are manifested emotions, and they deal damage and negative effects according to that emotion. It's kind of the elemental system of this game, and you can utilize it as well. Though, so far I haven't gotten much use out of it. These entities have their own unique moveset and move independently on the battlefield. They are just another enemy, so the number of enemy types doubles more or less, which still isn't a huge amount, but it still leads to a few more different combat scenarios. Since these entities are emotions given form, their attacks are accompanied by screams and wailing, whatever fits the enemy in question. And also, while one of them is on the field, the enemy linked to it is effectively invincible. You can still attack them, but instead of hurting them, it depletes their stance gauge, which at times is a valid approach to these battles. Because when you've defeated the entity, the other enemies become vulnerable again, and the ones whose stance you've broken can instantly be finished. The entity will appear again after a short while, so you have to deal with the remaining enemies quickly. Sometimes a whole bunch of enemies is linked to one entity, and sometimes more than just one entity is linked to an enemy, and especially in the latter case it can be a bit confusing as to what to do in the fight, and sometimes an entity got summoned back to the field just a moment after I've defeated it, so yeah, there's just a sliver of jank in the game, but for most of the encounters it worked fine. Leveling in this game also works different from other Souls games. Your character has no level at all, but your weapons receive XP with every defeated enemy. And when they rank up, their damage increases and so do other stats, like limbic energy you use for special abilities and stuff like that. The max level of a weapon, though, is determined by its grade, and you can raise that at the blacksmith. In addition to flat experience, enemies also drop limbic shards when they die, with harder enemies dropping more valuable shards. And those shards are required to upgrade your equipment and also craft certain items. But the blacksmith can only do so much in the beginning, and you have to bring him smithing tomes to unlock more options, so it all ties back into the whole exploration aspect. Your health and damage reduction comes completely from your defensive gear that you also upgrade with shards, so all of your stats are determined by your equipment. Now, whenever you die, you lose the gained experience as well as all the shards gathered since the last checkpoint, and all the enemies come back to life. That is, if you enabled it in the options menu. It's off by default, at least when you play on normal. Why though? It took me a while before I died for the first time, but then it felt weird that the enemies didn't return. The game said in the beginning that they would, but that wasn't happening. Look, it's fine that this is an option in addition to a difficulty selection. But why is it hidden in the options menu and not something you are asked when you start the game? But yeah, when it's on, it appears very much like most of the other Souls-likes, and in principle it works the same. But here again the game has its own quirks. A few reviewers made the ridiculous claim that this here was the most punishing Souls game because, in theory, it's possible to lose all your experience and go all the way back to level 1. And I don't understand what the fuss is all about. Though it seems some websites just copy-pasted incomplete information. Again, it's baffling how much wrong info even major sites put out, but I guess that's nothing new, and then everyone just copies it.
When news sources all copy each other like this and don't fact-check anything, all it takes is one wrong piece of information, and then half of the world accepts it as established fact.
If you stop and think about it for a moment, it's not that different from any other game with that mechanic. If you play through the whole of Dark Souls without handing your souls in and die on the last boss, then all your experience is gone. The only difference is that this game doesn't drop all your experience in a pool where you died. Aside from that, it's the same here. It's just that your weapons get immediately stronger after collecting enough XP, and they can level down when you lose the experience. But even then, you got an immediate advantage that you don't get in most other Souls-likes. And I mean, as soon as you activate a checkpoint, your experience is safe. It just looks more punishing, what with the weapon getting weaker, but in the end, it's the same reset as in any other Souls game. Aside from the very start of the game, or when you find a new piece of equipment, you won't ever be in a position where you lose all the progress made in a weapon. The punishment is even lower, since checkpoints don't work like bonfires. They neither heal you nor repopulate the area with enemies. They do save your progress and all your gained experience and such, and they let you travel to your vehicle. So there's never a downside to hitting one, but they also don't present as many benefits. Furthermore, the game is overall rather easy. I mean, for the subgenre it somewhat inhabits. On merciless difficulty, enemies hit pretty hard and are really aggressive, so even without spam the game can get really challenging in certain instances, but even then it's manageable most of the time. It's just that even single attacks can drain a lot of your stamina, so enemies have an easier time overwhelming you. I'm not confident enough to judge how well balanced the different difficulty settings are, but I feel the medium selection is a bit too easy, while merciless makes some enemies unnecessarily strong. Though maybe I just need to upgrade my equipment more and gather shards in lower level areas. Fortunately, you can fine-tune your experience extensively. Want enemies more aggressive but still not hitting like a truck? Just adjust the sliders. I always appreciate a modular difficulty selection instead of an all-or-nothing approach. But yeah, if you're not cranking up all the difficulty settings, the game isn't that hard. Still challenging, not a walk in the park, but certainly one of the more lenient Souls-adjacent games. Interestingly, you can't do anything about the puzzle difficulty. Not sure if that's deliberate or just a symptom of an industry almost entirely regarding challenge only in motor skill based activities, so reaction, button combos, steering and the like. There are exceptions, even high profile ones, but most games only adjust damage numbers and the like. Not that it's needed in this game, I just noticed it. Getting around, finding your way or solving puzzles isn't all that hard either, but even so, everything felt rewarding so far. I felt smart when I found a creative solution to a puzzle, and it felt good when I dug myself out of a bad situation and kept calm during a battle and regained my lost health through patience and perseverance. Exploring this hauntingly beautiful game world with its gritty and realistic World War I aesthetic mixed in with retro-futuristic technology and these alien structures is so engaging, massively helped by the whole minimal hand-holding approach. And hey, bonus points for weaving these silly Final Fantasy references even into the game's lore. The devs must be huge fans of especially Final Fantasy VI. I'm really happy with my purchase. The game is far from flawless, be it the story or presentation of it, the enemy variety or some repetitiveness in the combat system or the purposeful lack of direction backfiring, and of course the occasional stutters. But none of these issues are big enough to take away from what the game has to offer. A deeply immersive experience, great atmosphere, a lot of unique and creative ideas that lead to a lot of fun challenges. And with the many unconventional and also conventional puzzles, it kinda is the thinking man's action game. If you're into these action games and don't mind that it doesn't go all out on the Souls principle, or if you want a more gritty Zelda-like action adventure, give this one a shot. It's totally worth checking out. And with that, I'm off. I wish you the greatest of days, this has been Rady, and I hope to see you again on the next game.